The wind that night cut through my coat like it was paper, and the snow on Highway 14 outside Cody, Wyoming, was already past my ankles when my son's truck disappeared around the bend. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds watching the red taillights shrink into the white before I understood he wasn't coming back. 73 years old, no phone, no wallet, wearing nothing but a button-down shirt under a thin canvas jacket because my daughter-in-law had insisted I leave my things at the cabin. "We'll grab them later, Dad, don't be dramatic." That was the last thing she said to me before my son told me to get out. My name is Walter Brennan. For 38 years, I worked as a forensic accountant for the Department of the Treasury, the last 14 of those embedded with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Denver. I spent my career untangling the schemes of men who thought they were smarter than the paper trail. Tax evasion, embezzlement, inheritance fraud, money laundering through shell corporations in places most folks couldn't find on a map. I retired 6 years ago with a federal pension, a house outside Boulder paid off in full, and an investment portfolio I'd built quietly over 4 decades, roughly $2.8 million, give or take, depending on the market that morning. My son Daniel knew about the house. He didn't know about the rest, or so I thought. I started walking. The wind was coming down off the Absaroka Mountains, and the temperature was dropping fast. I figured it was already in the low teens. My fingers had stopped hurting after the first mile, which I knew from my Boy Scout days was a bad sign. I kept walking anyway, because the only other option was sitting down in a snowdrift, and I wasn't ready to die yet. Not over this. Not because of her. Let me back up. 2 years before that night, my son Daniel met a woman named Vanessa at a real estate conference in Phoenix. He was 41, divorced once already, working as a regional manager for a hotel chain. Vanessa was 34, a self-described luxury property consultant, which I later learned meant she sold timeshares and got fired from 3 different brokerages for misrepresenting square footage. They were married within 7 months. I drove down to Phoenix for the wedding because that's what fathers do. I shook her hand, smiled at the photographer, and felt something cold settle in my chest the moment she said, "Daddy Walter, Daniel's told me so much about your beautiful home." Daddy Walter. I'd known the woman for 45 minutes. The first year of their marriage, Daniel called me maybe 4 times. The second year, the calls increased, but the subject was always money. Vanessa wanted to start her own brokerage. Vanessa needed help with a down payment on a Scottsdale condo. Vanessa's mother was sick, and the medical bills were piling up. I sent $22,000 over 18 months because Daniel was my son, and I'd promised his mother on her deathbed that I'd always take care of him. Margaret had been gone 11 years by then, but a promise is a promise. Then, in October of that year, Daniel called and said he and Vanessa wanted to take me on a trip. A father-son bonding weekend at a cabin Vanessa's family owned outside Cody, Wyoming. Just the 3 of us. Beautiful country, fresh mountain air. He sounded different on that call. Softer. Like the boy he used to be. I said yes before I'd thought it through. I should have thought it through. The cabin was real, but it didn't belong to Vanessa's family. I figured that out the second day when a propane delivery truck pulled up and the driver asked for someone named Mr. Halverson. Vanessa intercepted him at the door, signed something quickly, and waved him off. When I asked her about it, she laughed and said her mother had remarried a Halverson years ago and she still forgot to update the paperwork. The lie was clumsy. I'd been listening to liars for 40 years. I made a mental note and kept smiling. That night, Daniel was quiet at dinner. He drank more than I'd ever seen him drink. 3 bourbons before the meal, 2 glasses of wine with it. Vanessa kept refilling his glass and rubbing his shoulder and whispering things in his ear. Around 10 o'clock she suggested I might want to sit by the fire while they cleaned up. I said sure. I sat in that big leather chair facing the fireplace, and through the reflection in the dark window beside it, I watched her hand my son a folded piece of paper. He read it. He nodded. He drank some more. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, the storm Vanessa had supposedly not known was coming rolled in from the northwest. By noon, there was 8 inches on the ground. Around 2 in the afternoon, Daniel told me to get my coat on. We were going to drive into town for supplies before the roads closed. Vanessa would stay back and start dinner. I knew the moment he said it that I wasn't coming back to that cabin. I knew it the way you know a man is lying when he won't meet your eyes. Still, I put on my coat. I left my phone on the kitchen counter because she'd asked me earlier if I wanted her to charge it for me, and I'd said yes without thinking. I left my wallet and my overnight bag in the guest room. I walked out to that pickup truck and got in the passenger side and watched my son grip the steering wheel with both hands like a man trying not to drown. We drove for 40 minutes, past the highway turnoff for town, past the gas station, past the last cell tower, out onto a service road that skirted the edge of the national forest, and then onto a logging road that hadn't been plowed in weeks. Daniel didn't speak the whole time. Finally, he stopped the truck. "Get out, Dodd." I looked at him. He was staring straight ahead through the windshield, and his hands were still on the wheel. "Daniel," I said, "get out. Vanessa told me what you said about her, about what you'd do to our marriage. I'm not letting you destroy what I have left. Get out, you useless old burden, and don't come back." I'd never said a word about Vanessa to anyone. Not to him, not to a friend, not to a counselor, not to anybody. But Vanessa had clearly told him I had. She'd built a story for him to believe. And he'd believed it because he wanted to. Because believing it gave him permission to do what she'd been preparing him to do for months. I got out. He drove away. I started walking. The first mile was the hardest, because that was when the cold started to feel like something inside my chest instead of outside my skin. Around the second mile, I started seeing flickers of light at the edge of my vision. I knew what that was too. Hypothermia plays tricks on your eyes before it kills you. I kept walking because walking was warmer than not walking, and because somewhere down that road there had to be a house, a barn, a hunting lodge, anything. It was a snowmobile that found me, 4 hours and 17 minutes after Daniel had left me on that road, according to the report later. A man named Earl Whitcomb, a retired oil field worker who lived 8 miles from the nearest paved road and who had been out checking on his trap line. He saw me staggering along the shoulder, looking, in his words, like a ghost that hadn't figured out it was supposed to lie down yet. He got me onto the back of his sled, drove me to his cabin, wrapped me in 3 wool blankets, and called the Park County Sheriff's Department on his satellite phone. By the time the ambulance reached us, my core temperature was 86 degrees. The ER doctor and Cody told me later that another 20 minutes and they wouldn't have been having a conversation with me at all. While I was in that hospital bed, hooked up to warming blankets and a heart monitor, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my younger brother Frank, who lived in Sacramento. I told him I was fine, that I'd had a scare on a hike, and that I needed him to fly to Boulder and stay at my house for a couple of weeks. He didn't ask questions. Frank never does. The second call was to a man named Theodore Park, an attorney I'd worked with on 3 different federal cases back in the 90s. Theo was 76 now, semi-retired, but he still kept an office in Denver. I told him exactly what had happened on that road outside Cody. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Walter, what do you want to do?" "I want to give them enough rope," I said. "And I want to be holding the other end when they hang themselves." "How long are you willing to wait?" "As long as it takes." The hospital discharged me after 3 days. I told the sheriff's deputy who came to take my statement that I'd gotten disoriented on a walk during the storm, that my son and his wife must be worried sick, and that I'd already been in touch with them. The deputy was relieved. He had a stack of cases on his desk, and one less mystery was a good thing. I asked him not to contact my family because I wanted to surprise them with my recovery. He shrugged and made a note. That was that. I didn't go back to the cabin. I took a Greyhound bus from Cody to Billings, and from Billings I flew to Sacramento under a different name using cash Theo had wired to a Western Union there. I stayed with Frank for 6 weeks while my fingers and toes healed, and my doctors monitored the damage to my heart. During those 6 weeks, I did exactly nothing visible. To the outside world, Walter Brennan had simply gone quiet. No bank activity, no credit card use, no posts on the Facebook account I barely used anyway. But underneath the surface, I was working. Theo and I built the trap one piece at a time, and we built it carefully because I'd put men in prison for 40 years and I knew exactly how a defense attorney would try to pick it apart. The first piece was the will. I had an existing will, drawn up in 2019, that left everything to Daniel as my only child. Theo and I drafted a new one, dated 3 weeks after the incident in Wyoming, that left the entire estate to a charitable trust for victims of elder financial abuse, with a sealed letter explaining why. We had it notarized by a woman named Patricia Aldrich, a court reporter Theo had known for 30 years, and we recorded the entire signing on video. Patricia agreed to keep the document confidential until I either authorized its release or died. I asked her, for the record, if she understood why this was necessary. She said yes. She said she'd seen too many old people in her courtroom who'd trusted the wrong family members. The second piece was the surveillance. I had a contact from my Treasury days, a man named Marcus Ojibwe, who ran a private investigation firm in Denver specializing in financial crimes. Marcus put 2 cameras in my Boulder house before I came home, both of them disguised as smoke detectors, both of them recording continuously to a server in his office. He also set up a small audio recorder inside the leather-bound Bible I kept on the living room mantel, the one Margaret had given me on our 20th anniversary. Daniel and Vanessa would never touch that Bible. They'd never even notice it. The third piece was the bait. This was the part that took the longest to set up, and the part I'm least proud of, even now. I came home to Boulder in mid-December. I called Daniel. I let him hear how weak my voice was, how tired, how shaken. I told him I'd survived, that a kind stranger had found me, that I knew there must have been some kind of misunderstanding on the road. I told him I wanted to make peace before Christmas. I told him I'd been thinking about my mortality, about what mattered, about family. I asked him if he and Vanessa would come spend the holidays with me. He said yes within a minute. I could hear Vanessa in the background, almost vibrating with excitement. They arrived on December 20th. Vanessa hugged me at the door and called me Daddy Walter and cried real tears, because I think part of her actually believed she was a good person who'd been through a hard time. People like her always do. Daniel hugged me too, and for a moment, just one moment, I felt my old love for him try to surface. He was still the boy I'd taught to ride a bike on the driveway in Aurora. He was still the kid who'd sat next to me on the porch every 4th of July, watching fireworks and asking why the blue ones were the loudest. He was still my son, and he had left me on a logging road to die. I let them stay for 2 weeks. I cooked them meals and asked about their lives, and let Vanessa talk endlessly about the brokerage she was going to launch in the spring. I mentioned casually over coffee one morning that the doctors had told me my heart had taken serious damage from the cold, that they were estimating I might have 18 months left, maybe 2 years if I was lucky. I watched Vanessa's eyes do something they couldn't quite hide. I watched my son's hand holding his coffee cup get very still. 2 days later, I accidentally left a manila folder on the kitchen counter while I went to take a shower. The folder contained a draft will, dated 8 months earlier, leaving everything to Daniel. It also contained a handwritten note in my own handwriting that said, "Need to update before March. Discuss with Theo." Vanessa would assume I meant I was going to change the will. She would assume she had 3 months to make sure that didn't happen. She took photos of the documents. The cameras caught her doing it. The audio recorder in the Bible caught her, 2 hours later, telling Daniel about it. "He's going to cut us out, Danny. He's going to give it all to some charity or some woman or who knows what. We have to act before March. He survived the road. We can't try that again. We don't need to. He just told us his heart is bad. There are pills. There are ways. People have heart attacks, Danny. Old people especially." I sat in my bedroom upstairs that night and listened to the live feed through an earpiece Marcus had given me. I listened to my son agree. I listened to him agree. I listened to him agree. And then I went into the bathroom and threw up until there was nothing left in my stomach. The next morning I was cheerful at breakfast. I made pancakes. I joked about getting old. I told Daniel I was thinking of finally taking that trip to Ireland I'd always talked about, and would he and Vanessa want to come along my treat. Vanessa squeezed my hand and said it sounded wonderful. Daniel didn't meet my eyes. They left on January 4th. 2 weeks later, a package arrived at the house. It was addressed to me from a company called Wellness Age Pharmaceuticals, with a return address in Phoenix. Inside was a bottle of what looked like over-the-counter heart supplements, with a note from Vanessa that said, "Daddy Walter, my naturopath swears by these for heart health. Take 2 a day with food. Love you." I sent the bottle directly to a forensic toxicology lab Marcus had set up an account with. The lab report came back 9 days later. The capsules contained digoxin, a powerful cardiac glycoside that, in the doses they'd packed into each capsule, would induce a fatal heart arrhythmia in any man my age within a week of regular use. There was no naturopath. There was no Wellness Age Pharmaceuticals registered with any state licensing board. The Phoenix return address was a UPS store mailbox that Vanessa had rented under a fake name 3 weeks earlier. Marcus had documented all of it. That was when I called the FBI. The agent who handled the case was a woman named Rebecca Tran, mid-40s, sharp as a paring knife, 15 years on the financial crimes desk in Denver. She'd actually worked under one of my former colleagues. When I laid out the file Theo Marcus and I had built, she looked at me across the conference table for a long moment and said, "Mr. Brennan, in 20 years I've never seen a victim build a case this clean. You sure you're retired?" "Just for tonight," I said. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning in February. Daniel was picked up at the Phoenix Hotel where he was working a regional managers meeting. Vanessa was arrested coming out of a Pilates class in Scottsdale. The charges were attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, mail fraud, attempted poisoning, and elder financial abuse. The bail hearing was held the next day. The judge denied bail for both of them, citing the premeditation evident in the evidence and the flight risk represented by Vanessa's repeatedly fraudulent identities. The trial began in late June. By then it had been picked up by the regional press. Retired federal investigator allegedly targeted for murder by son and daughter-in-law. The kind of headline that fills a courtroom. I sat in the front row every day, in the same gray suit I'd worn to my wife's funeral, because some occasions demand a certain kind of dignity. Theo wasn't lead prosecutor, of course, but he sat second chair with the U.S. Attorney's Office because of his familiarity with the file. The lead prosecutor was a woman named Diane Velasquez, and she was as good as anyone I'd ever seen in a courtroom. She walked the jury through the evidence one piece at a time, building the case the way you build a stone wall, every block carrying its weight. The audio recordings, the video of Vanessa photographing the documents, the toxicology report on the digoxin capsules, the UPS store rental, Earl Whitcomb's testimony about finding me on the road in 12-degree weather, wearing a canvas jacket, the hospital records. The defense attorney, a man named Howard Rasmussen out of Cheyenne, did what defense attorneys do. He tried to argue that I'd entrapped my son. He tried to argue that the supplements were a sincere gift, and that the digoxin was either a manufacturing accident or a plant. He tried to argue that the audio recordings were taken out of context, that Vanessa's words about pills and heart attacks were part of a hypothetical conversation about a movie they'd watched. The jury didn't buy any of it. You could see it in their faces. They'd already made up their minds by the third day. But Rasmussen made one move I'd been expecting. He called me to the stand and tried to make me look like a vindictive old man who'd manipulated his son into a trap. "Mr. Brennan," he said, "isn't it true that you never approved of your son's marriage?" I had concerns about his wife. Those concerns turned out to be correct. And rather than express those concerns to your son directly, you set up an elaborate scheme involving hidden cameras, a fake will, and federal investigators. I expressed my concerns to my son the night I survived a logging road outside Cody, Wyoming. He chose to believe his wife instead. After that, talking didn't seem like a productive option. "You wanted them to commit these crimes, didn't you, Mr. Brennan?" I looked at him for a long beat. Then I looked at the jury. "Mr. Rasmussen, I gave them the chance to do nothing. I gave them the chance to enjoy a Christmas with me. I gave them the chance to go home, live their lives, and inherit my estate in the natural course of things, which would have happened in my lifetime anyway, because I'd already planned to leave Daniel a substantial gift. They chose instead to mail me a bottle of cardiac poison disguised as vitamins. I didn't make that choice for them, I just made sure there was a record of it." Rasmussen tried to follow up. The judge sustained the prosecution's objection before he could finish his sentence. He sat down. I was excused. As I walked back to my seat in the gallery, I caught Daniel's eye for the first time in months. He looked away. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon. Guilty on all counts for both defendants. The courtroom was silent for about 2 seconds, and then Vanessa started screaming, not crying. Screaming. The bailiffs had to physically restrain her. Daniel sat motionless, staring at the table in front of him, like a man who'd just realized he'd been holding a losing hand the whole time and had bet everything anyway. Sentencing was 3 weeks later. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Eleanor Whitfield who'd sat on the federal bench for 22 years, sentenced Daniel to 22 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for the first 15. She sentenced Vanessa to 28 years, citing her role as the architect of the conspiracy. Several people in the gallery, including a few who'd come every day just to watch, applauded when the gavel came down on Vanessa. Whitfield silenced them, but I caught the smallest movement at the corner of her mouth. She'd seen what we'd all seen. She'd weighed it accordingly. Restitution was set at $612,000, joint and several. Their assets were frozen and seized within the week. The Scottsdale condo, the 2 leased BMWs, Vanessa's jewelry, the boat Daniel had bought the year before. None of it touched the total, but it was something. After the sentencing, I asked the bailiff if I could have a minute with my son. He looked at the judge. She nodded once. Daniel was brought over to the rail in his shackles. He couldn't quite look at me. "Daniel," I said. He didn't answer. "You remember when I taught you to play poker on the back porch in Aurora? You were maybe 10 years old. You kept trying to bluff me because you'd seen it in a movie. And I told you something. Do you remember what I told you?" He shook his head once. "I told you that bluffing only works if the other player can't see your hand. And I told you that some people, son, can always see your hand. They've been looking at hands their whole lives. They know what a tell looks like before you know you've made one." He finally looked up at me. His eyes were red and empty. "I could see your hand the night you stopped that truck," I said. "I could see it the day you walked through my front door at Christmas. I could see it every single time you smiled at me across the dinner table while she was upstairs writing the prescription for my death. I just wanted to make sure the law could see it too." "Dad," he whispered. "Dad, I'm sorry." I looked at him. I looked at the boy I'd raised, the boy who was gone now, replaced by a man who had mailed me poison and called me daddy in the same week. "I know you are," I said. "But sorry doesn't put the pills back in the bottle." I walked out of the courthouse into a bright Colorado afternoon. Theo was waiting for me on the steps. He didn't say anything. He just put his hand on my shoulder for a minute and then walked with me to the car. I sold the Boulder house in September. A young couple from Austin bought it for $940,000, and they were lovely people, and I was glad it would be filled with their voices instead of my memories. I moved to a small place in Bend, Oregon, a one-story with a garden and a view of the Cascades from the back deck. Frank came up to help me unpack. We drank a bottle of bourbon together that first night and talked about Margaret and about the boy Daniel had been before everything went wrong, and then we didn't talk about him again. I gave away most of the money, $800,000 to a foundation that helps elderly Americans recover from financial abuse by family members, $600,000 to a legal aid organization in Wyoming that provides free representation to seniors who've been victimized in inheritance fraud schemes, $400,000 to fund a lecture series at the University of Colorado on detecting and preventing elder exploitation. I kept enough to live comfortably for whatever years I have left, and I set up a small annuity for Frank because he's my brother, and I love him, and he never asked me for a thing. Vanessa filed an appeal 6 months into her sentence. It was denied. She filed another one. It was denied too. Last I heard, she'd been moved from the federal facility in Dublin, California, to a lower security camp in Texas, and she was working in the kitchen and writing letters to a true crime podcaster who'd taken an interest in her case. The podcaster eventually stopped responding. Daniel hasn't reached out. I haven't reached out either. Maybe one day I will. Maybe one day I'll drive to the prison in Florence and sit across from him and try to understand what happened inside his head during those months when he was choosing between his father and his wife. Or maybe I won't. Maybe some doors, once they close, are not meant to be opened again, and the wisdom of getting older is knowing which is which. I play chess most mornings now, on the back deck with my coffee, online, against strangers. It's a quiet game, chess. You sit there and you think about what your opponent might do, and you think about what you might do in response, and you try to see the board not just as it is, but as it will be in 3 or 4 moves. Most people, even good players, only think one move ahead. They see the immediate threat, and they react to it, and by the time they realize the real attack was coming from somewhere else entirely, the game is already over. My father taught me chess on a card table in the basement of our house in Cleveland when I was 8 years old. He told me something then that I never forgot. He said, "Son, the man who wins is rarely the man with the best position. He's the man who saw the position coming." I saw it coming. From the moment my daughter-in-law called me Daddy Walter at her wedding, I saw it coming. I just didn't want to be right. Sometimes sitting on my deck in Bend, watching the morning light come down off the mountains, I think about Earl Whitcomb on his snowmobile out there in the Wyoming snow. I think about how easy it would have been for him to take a different route that day, to stay home, to check his trap line an hour later. I think about how the entire rest of my life, every cup of coffee, every chess game, every quiet morning, exists because one stranger decided to do his rounds at exactly the right time. I sent Earl a check last spring, enough to pay off his cabin and buy a new snowmobile. He sent it back with a note that said he was glad I was alive and that he hadn't done anything any decent man wouldn't have done. I framed the note. It hangs above my desk now, next to a photograph of Margaret and a small wooden chess piece, a white king, that I keep there to remind me what I learned the hard way. You can't always trust the people who share your blood. But every once in a while, a stranger in the snow will save your life for no reason other than that he's a good man, and that's enough to keep you believing in something. That's enough.